to explain it. It's just for it literally has 100 team yet.
Okay, so if you guys could mute yourselves really quickly, I think some people don't realize that they're not on mute. But in general, like you guys can have your videos on, videos off, however you feel most comfortable. My name is Marika. Thank you so much to Lillian and to Iris for organizing this amazing conference. I think it's so great that we're bringing all these ladies here together to talk about technology and the different ways that technology can make a better world for tomorrow. So I'm going to share a presentation with you guys. And I apologize in advance. I'm going to be sharing a presentation, but also at times closing it down so I can see people, talk to people easier. So if there's any slowdowns because of the sharing, well, that's technology. I don't know. It happens sometimes. Oof. Oh gosh. I'm already having issues. Okay, great. Okay, great. So I hope can you guys unmute yourselves and tell me if you can see everything, if everything's looking good?
We can see it.
That looks great.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, great. So my name is Marika. I'm a law student at the University of Maryland. Before law school, I was working in immigration law. And one of the things that really began to frustrate me, specifically working in business immigration, were the ways that bureaucracy created barriers and the way that it prevented immigrants from having access to information about their current statuses, their change of statuses, and prevented them ultimately from being able to be successful citizens in the United States. And so I started looking into different solutions that existed in technology, because as much as the current administration has purposely used blockades and barriers to prevent immigrants from being able to stay in this country, there's also been a structural issue in the immigration system that is based on the way that paper processing occurs. I'm really not going to get into that, but just know that technology could be a very good solution for a lot of the issues. And while looking at technology, I was looking at traditional forms of technology, which all relied on centralized forms of access and control. And then I learned about something called blockchain. And I was like, this is a great alternative. So my first question to you guys is, and you guys can raise your hands or you can just unmute and talk, or you can put this in the chat, but who knows anything about blockchain? Like what do you guys know? I kind of want to see the range of understanding here. This is not correct. Why am I struggling? Wait, can I? Yes, okay, now I can see people.
Is it okay if we don't know what it is? Because I kind of have no idea.
That's perfectly fine. You have no idea what it is. Does anybody have any idea? Does anyone have any background in it?
I actually had an internship where it was like UX and blockchain related. But yeah, so I know a little bit about the background and how the technology works. Essentially, some people are saying this in the chat. It is a distributed ledger. So instead of having, it's basically just a technology that keeps track of all transactions that are happening in its network. And instead of, say, like Facebook had servers in a central location, every person in the network, which they call nodes typically, are computers that have a little bit of access of the data, or they have all the access to the data, but they use their storage on like their computer to help manage all of everything that's happening in a decentralized way. So no one entity owns the data.
Yes, Kennedy, that's an amazing explanation. Thank you so much. You did so much of my work for me. I want to highlight a few things that you said. So you talked about this distinction between information sharing on blockchain versus the way information sharing happens now. So information sharing on what we currently use, like current forms of internet, happens through the use of third-party servers. So for example, if I'm sending a message to, for example, Kennedy through my computer, I type in my little message to Kennedy, my computer sends that message to a third-party server. That server will take a copy of my information and then send it to Kennedy. The way that this works, like the reason why this works really well is because, you know, everything is controlled by this server. And if anything wrong happens to that piece of information, we know who to talk to. Like if the server is controlled by Amazon, like we can just, you know, call someone at Amazon or send a message to somebody at Amazon and have them figure our issues out. On blockchain, what ends up happening is instead of relying on a third party to take care of our information and to direct it in particular ways, our computers can actually directly talk to each other. So it's peer-to-peer communication. It's like the buzzword phrase. And what basically that means is that rather than information being copied on a third-party server and then attached to anything, blocks of information that are created by our computers are attached to a greater chain, the blockchain, through cryptographic hashes. And the way that that attachment works is through something called a consensus algorithm. So I'm going to talk about more about consensus and attachment a bit later on. But what's important to know now is that because each block of information is attached to the blockchain through this, through cryptographic hashes, or like with the help of cryptographic hashes, each block has information about the previous block of information already on it, which can help things like trust in terms of, you know, preventing like third-party people from hacking or like changing that information, and can really help us to ascertain that whatever information is currently attached to the blockchain like really is meant to be there, really is meant to be in that particular place. So one thing that I'm going to emphasize through this talk is these ways of attaching the blocks to the chain through consensus. There's a few different consensus algorithms out there. There's proof of work, which is the most popular currently. It's done through Bitcoin. It's like most decentralized applications on another hosting site called Ethereum. Are using proof of work too. But there's also something called proof of stake. And I'm going to make the argument that proof of stake is actually a lot better for blockchain governance. Proof of stake is where a block can only be attached to the chain if a majority of computers on the network agree to attach that block. What this allows is basically a voting procedure for attaching new information to the blockchain. So with that kind of in mind, how do you guys think I'm thinking about government? Like what is our government? How would we define it? Anybody?
As checks and balances.
Great, checks and balances, amazing, Lilith. That's definitely one of the things I'm thinking about. Another thing that I'm thinking about, the hint is voting.
Yeah, definitely democracy in voting.
Yes, Kennedy, excellent. Democracy, voting, distributed power. Basically, so I'm going to take what Lilith and Kennedy have said and kind of mix them into two. So our government at its core is meant to distribute power. It's not meant to centralize power. We distribute power between the federal government and the state government. We distribute power between different branches of government. We distribute power amongst people by allowing people to vote for representatives who are meant to vote on particular decisions. So we have in our structure an agreement or a desire to increase distribution of power. Great. What blockchain can also allow us to do is to distribute power over information. So when we were first talking, I think it was Kennedy again, Kennedy, you mentioned that it's called a distributed ledger technology, blockchain is. Blockchain is a database technology. It's something that allows us to share information and control information in a different way than we've been controlling information in the past, in a way that is decentralized. You mentioned nodes. It's decentralized among the different computers who are a part of the blockchain network, who in a proof of stake consensus algorithm are voting to attach particular blocks of information to the blockchain. I think this underlying structure is what can really serve our government best. So first I want to talk a bit about this question of what is government? What is the purpose of government? So I have on the screen a quote, "When Black people are free, everyone is free." This is a quote by Alicia Garza, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. And when she's asked about this question, Alicia Garza often says, yes, when Black people are free, everyone is free, because when we protect the most vulnerable in our society, we end up protecting everyone. She talks about this as a design tool for designing policy. We should be designing policy in order to protect everyone. So why is this important? Let's go back to this question of what is our government, right? So we talked about our government as a democracy, as checks and balances. Well, one of the main functions of our government is actually to distribute resources, right? So oftentimes those resources are things like institutional resources, so like research or education or public planning. Those resources can also be economic resources. They can be like social security, social safety nets. They can also be intangible things. Like I worked in immigration, and in a world that's defined by borders and nationalism, your citizenship status is actually a resource, right? Another resource is your voice in the government. You've done that by voting. And oftentimes when trying to distribute resources, our government ends up concentrating those resources in communities that already have access to power and access to privileges, instead of distributing those resources to communities that are most in need. Or oftentimes the reason communities are in need of resources is because of this unequal distribution that had already existed. Specifically when talking about America, racism is not a great example. I mean, it's a great example of the way that unequal resource distribution happens, because our government has systemically deprived Black community of economic and power resources, and instead pumped them with oppressing police violence forces. So when we think about what Alicia Garza is asking us to do, to design policy to protect the most vulnerable, what she's asking us to do is to design policy to protect everyone by thinking about the most vulnerable first. And I actually don't think, and I think Alicia Garza would agree, that this shouldn't end with policy. Like, this is a general design perspective. We should be designing our technology also with the most vulnerable in mind, because by doing that, we can actually design our technology to include everybody. So, yes. Oops. Okay, so another question for you guys. When did a technology feel like it didn't work for you?
As someone from the UK, I'd like to say the track and trace app isn't as good as it could be.
The track and trace app? I'm actually not sure what that is. Can you explain that?
So basically our app for coronavirus contact tracing.
Oh.
Yeah, there's so many issues with it. Like, it's so laggy, it won't display notifications for when you do come in contact with someone that's registered. And it's just overall really inefficient system.
And specifically, how does that impact you? Like, how do you feel like you, how does that technology end up impacting your ability to use it or impact your ability to stay safe during the coronavirus?
Yeah, so there's been an issue that me and other people I know have run into where the app won't send you a notification when you've been exposed to someone who's positive, and then you only see that, 3 days later if you happen to open the app and you realize, oh, you should have been quarantining for 3 days already. So yeah, that's a big issue with it, I feel.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge issue.
Yeah, literally. And it's our coronavirus app. And oh my God.
Okay, Giselle, and now I wonder if you can think, so this is a time when technology didn't feel like it worked for you, but this like lagginess, this inability to give people their health information on time, for whom do you think is that a major barrier to their having equal access to health understandings?
So I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you mean people to whom is it a barrier that the app isn't, the best functionality?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some like core aspects of it. So like
Yeah. So
yeah.
I guess it puts the users of the app at risk if they're not being made aware of the information they're supposed to be being made aware of through and then the data collection is also really bad, so you have to just put in your details so many times. So yeah, I mean, maybe blockchain could be a solution to that as a way of storing all the data.
Yeah, blockchain is definitely being thought of in the health space. But I think maybe this way the question will make more sense. So obviously there are people in our society who are very aware of their health statuses or have, I mean, I know the UK has the national health program. So maybe this is less of an issue for you guys than it is for us. But certain people have access to information about their health or knowledge of their particular health status as a function of their privilege in society. So either they have, people in the family who are doctors, or they have like privatized health, and so they're able to see a doctor whenever they are worried about it, or maybe they live in an area that has, rapid coronavirus testing, because obviously, like if you live in a more dense area, then the time that it takes for you to get like a test back for your coronavirus is longer than if you live in a like maybe less dense area, or if you live in a rural area, then perhaps you have to drive out even further in order to get a coronavirus test than somebody who lived in maybe a more suburban area. So I'm thinking about like those particular differentials in access to health. This is a particular application that's meant to, or that people have wanted to even out people's ability to access information about their health. So I'm going to assume that the people who designed this program were thinking about, how can we best help British citizens understand their current status, either they have corona or they don't, in order to protect British citizens. But if certain people, or if the way that the app is created is creating these lagging times, then maybe people are going to be looking to other resources that they have access to in order to check their health status. And for people who are in more privileged positions, that's probably a bit easier. Like you have other resources that you can go to for people who maybe don't have the particular privileges of, wealth, or like depending on what area they live in, then perhaps they are already limited in the options that they have to look to. And so they are relying solely on this particular application to give them their coronavirus health status. And does that make more sense? of
Yeah. And I think that also feeds into like increased pressure on the testing services, because if the app's not working, then people are like, oh, I've got to book a test.
Yeah.
And those tests aren't getting to the people they need it. And then people, if you put your details in on the app, there are people that hundreds of volunteers will call you. But if we can see that, you know, you've already seen what's on the app, you focus those resources on people who don't have a smartphone, you know, like older generations who won't be using the app because they're more likely to respond to a phone call.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And I wonder, what do you guys think? The people who are designing these applications, are they asking themselves these questions? Are they working through these types of problems?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think they take these things into consideration, but
Yeah, Giselle, I think you're right. I think they do think about it. I think they're really trying. I just think,
definitely.
yeah, I just think that they're still coming up short. And I wonder,
Yeah.
I think oftentimes, you know, we have maybe maybe the pessimists in us want to say that these people just aren't trying, or they're not working hard enough, or they're not taking into account. Obviously, a huge part of this is that particular segments of our population are not represented in decision-making positions. So yes, potentially it is that they don't have people who might represent vulnerable groups in the room to talk to them about what different people might need. Like most likely they don't have a sex worker in there being like, well, for sex workers, like this is how we would prefer a coronavirus application to function. That said, I think ultimately it is going to be difficult to get every single type of person into the room. And so what we need to do is make sure that the structure we're working within allows us the flexibility and allows us or just ability in general to source information from vulnerable populations.
Just have broader participation.
Yes, broader participation. And that broader participation should come both by hiring people and maybe by like a different mechanism. So, this is who gets to ask the question. This was my slide where I talked about that, but I talked about it. So I'm going to make this argument throughout the second half of the presentation. Blockchain has the potential as a tool for government because of its inherent structure. What I'm talking about here when we talk about, or like, as Giselle just said, broader participation, how do we encourage broader or even get broader participation in general? We need a structure that allows us to reach that broader participation. And that's exactly where blockchain can be our answer. Why is structure important in general? Why am I specifically harping on the structure of blockchain as its greatest, positive? Well, because structure dictates our behaviors. So I have on the screen the first image. It's a mouse going through a maze. So structure can limit our behaviors, right? Like this mouse can't go where it needs to go. Oftentimes in our world, like we can't go where we need to go. If you look at a lot of public space architects who talk about the different ways that buildings are created or structured to either make people feel welcome in a particular space or make people feel like they can't enter that space, then you'll see how small things like whether or not there are windows on a street, whether or not there's comfortable seating for people and not like bars on windowsills, can actually change our desire to use a particular space as a public space and as a meeting grounds for many people. It can even change our desire to choose to drive to a particular location or walk to a particular location. Structure can also guide our choices. So I have a picture of Miranda Priestley. I don't know if you guys watch The Devil Wears Prada, But Meryl Streep has a really great monologue in that. Does anybody, can you guys maybe raise your hand, or I don't know if that works, or just like shout out if you know the monologue I'm talking about?
It's the one where she talks about cerulean,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, Corinne, that is correct.
Yeah, and where she's talking about the chains of decisions that dictate our daily behaviors, but which we are fundamentally blind to.
Yes, exactly. So she tells the other character in the film who's working for her, who's sort of mocking a fashion world, that fashion is important because where people who dictate fashion really do dictate the choices of the rest of the people in society on their fashion, because they have control, because they have power, because they are the decision makers and everybody else is just sort of a follower. And so ultimately we get to code. Like, what is code creating? Code is a tool that's creating a particular structure that we have to adapt to, right? So when your computer, for example, sends a piece of information to a third-party server, and that third-party server has ultimate control over that information, do you have an ability to decide where that information goes? Or do you have the ability to decide who that information is sold to? Sure, like the original piece of information might be sent to the person who you originally meant to send it to. But ultimately, that copy of your information that's stored in a centralized server is not under your control. It's now under the control of whoever owns the server. And also, it incentivizes people to create companies that want you to share your information with them, that want you to stay on their websites longer and longer in order to share that information. So just having this centralized structure of the internet be the underlying structure of the internet actually shapes both the companies that are able to thrive in the internet space and the way that we as individuals interact with the internet ourselves. Yeah. In this, information age, I'm actually going to make the argument that we don't have enough information we can trust. We have a lot of information. There's a lot of information everywhere. But trust is something that's lacking in our society. I think we see this especially when people think about government. I'm going to talk a bit about what I experienced in immigration law. When people didn't have access to understanding or knowledge or information of where their particular applications were in the process of immigration, of the immigration adjustment of status process, which basically just means people are changing their status and trying to get a green card or trying to get citizenship. When people didn't have access to information about where they were in that process, they became distrustful of the government. And when they became distrustful of the government, they began to panic and they began to clog up the system by sending in even more like stress calls and worries to the government, which it shouldn't be the case, but that ends up clogging up bureaucracy even more. By giving people access to information, by giving people power over their data, and by empowering them to be able to control or to feel like they can at least see who is accessing their data, we actually embed in people trust. And I hope that as we talk about a government that's on a distributed ledger technology, that's based in this structure of consensus voting, and that also allows for openness and transparency. I talked about this a bit at the beginning, but I don't think I really emphasized it as much as I should have. One of the biggest benefits of blockchain is that the ledger technology that it creates is immutable. And that means you can't change anything about it. When I was talking about cryptographic hashes, that's the immutable part of it. When you are sure that the information you're seeing is accurate information, and is the information that has been linked piece of information by piece of information, that is linked interagency, that is linked between different resource sharing departments, maybe, probably, you will end up trusting that information more. So ultimately, is blockchain going to solve all of our issues in life? Is this the solution to racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, inequalities in the economic sphere? Is it going to like give everybody money and so that we're all happy forevermore? No, it's probably not going to do that. But I think this ultimate structure of blockchain, a consensus mechanism that works by allowing different computers to vote on a particular piece of information before it's added to a system, creates the democratic backbone that we're looking for in our technology. It can end up mitigating inequality by fundamentally building a structure upon which we can build different types of technologies that we can use to achieve the justice goals we want to achieve. And it is the better technology for doing that because its structure is inherently asking us to prioritize consensus voting. It's asking us to prioritize decentralization of power. It's asking us to prioritize transparency. What I think the major benefit of blockchain isn't some technological nuance in how it functions, but actually the structure that it creates. Because if we create a structure that prioritizes our values, then hopefully we will be able to see technologies built on that structure that also reflect our values. And finally, I want to end on a bit of a sad note. There's only about 8 to 12% of people in blockchain are women. This is sort of even with the amount of women who own like Bitcoin and different cryptocurrencies. It's a sad small percentage. It's obviously even smaller for women of color. But I think what women can bring to the blockchain space, and specifically women who have a social justice perspective or a social justice lens, is this desire to prioritize creating a blockchain technology that is fundamental to the structures of democracy. Like any technology, blockchain is a tool. It is actually possible to make blockchain totally curve around any sort of consensus voting. You can have a consensus algorithm that isn't based on voting, that is in fact based on like a capitalist incentive, which is what proof of work sort of is, where instead of different computers on the node voting for a particular block of information to be added to the chain, you instead have computers who are getting like a monetary incentive to figure out a particular formula to add the block to the chain. And that's sort of, that makes me sad, honestly, because I don't think that's, if that proof of work system was adopted to our government, I think it would result in a structure that wasn't fundamentally based in democratic values, but instead based in capitalist values. And I think that could end up reprioritizing people who already have access to power. So yes, that's sort of the end of my presentation, but I would love to have more chats and have more talks. I know a lot of you are building applications today, and I wonder if you would be open to discussing or talking about the different things that you're creating or making or thinking about, and how you're thinking about the inherent structure of them, or you're thinking about who has access to them or how they can improve access for different types of populations. Do I have any volunteers?
I'll go. So one thing that I noticed is that a big part of Technica is trying to like bring in a lot of like minority groups into their image, which I really appreciate and I really like that kind of aspect. So I want to bring that into my own project as well because I'm very like passionate about that kind of thing, like social rights and human rights. So I want to like bring that into my project.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how are you thinking about doing that?
I think the main thing is like access. So making sure that like the project works in the hack works in a way where it's kind of like advertised towards specific minority groups.
Hmm.
So to make them feel more welcome, I can maybe make like headers and stuff that kind of like bring them into the image.
Yeah, that's great. Are you open to receiving like feedback or comments on it? Like, do you want people's input on how to do that best or think about that?
Yeah, that would be nice.
Okay, does anybody have suggestions? How do you pronounce your name? Alishaba?
Alishba.
Alishba. Does anybody have any recommendations or comments for Alishba?
I'd love to know more about what your project is.
So I haven't really gotten that into it yet, but I'm thinking of going into Islamophobia because I am Muslim, so I wanted to like go into that because I think that would, like being a part of a community, it kind of lets you want to make people more aware of that community. Cause I don't know how to explain it, but it's kind of like you have like kind of like you're in the community, so like you know what you deal with and you know what other people in your community deal with. So I was gonna go towards Islamophobia and how we can prevent that.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I got half of my family is Malay, so they're all Muslim too. So I appreciate what you're saying, and I think that's a really valuable that's a really valuable thing to get into.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Alishba, I'm wondering if you can, explain to us more about your project and specifically what you're thinking about doing, if it could be on blockchain potentially.
Yeah, so one thing that I wanted to do was, as I said, like since I am part of the community, I think a lot of people, like from my own experience, I've noticed that a lot of people don't really know much about Islam, and that kind of leads to Islamophobia because people don't understand it, so they think, oh, they're not accepting of it for that reason. So one thing I want to do with like the app or website that I make is like I want people to be aware. So maybe I could put out resources on the website that kind of says like, oh, this is Islam, this is what we do. And it's kind of similar to a lot of other religions. So I could also incorporate that to make people understand better.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I love that because it's decentralizing information and it's creating ease of access to information.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, would you be interested in adopting it on a block or like putting it on a blockchain platform? Are you thinking about that at all? Do you want to know more information about like different types of hosting platforms for blockchain? I actually wanted to like message you guys like resources if you wanted to start coding.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
I love using Canva for a presentation, so I liked your slide deck.
Thank you. I also love using Canva. Okay, also I need to stop sharing and why can't I? Stop share. Okay, I got it, guys. Yeah, let me send some of the information out. So my oops. So I'm going to share resources about coding on Ethereum. Ethereum is a hosting platform for blockchain that is based on something called smart contracts. And smart contracts are like a self-executing contract that basically allows ease of transactions. So typically when you're thinking about like Bitcoin or any of the like cryptocurrencies, you're thinking about something that's, you know, made for buying and selling money or like investing money, which is useful, but obviously is limited to money. And if you want to go beyond that, Ethereum is not better, but is an alternative because it was specifically made with smart contracts in mind. You can have smart contracts on Bitcoin hosting platforms, but people run into more issues. Not that it's not possible, it's just most people prefer Ethereum. And Ethereum uses coding language called Solidity. So you guys can kind of test that out, see if you like it. I put like 2. Oh yes, thanks Iris. I think I sent it to you privately. Okay, so yeah, so I put 2 links in the chat if you guys want to check those out. And yeah, I don't know, any other questions?
Did you want to like maybe create a Slack channel so people could ask you more questions after this? Since
Oh, sure. I need to re-download Slack because I may have deleted it, but sure. Can you send me the Slack information? And then does everybody already have the Technica Slack account? Okay, great. It's just me. Okay, great.
Cool.
Okay, yeah. Thanks you guys for coming. Thanks everybody.